Good evening. Hello, good evening from central London. So I am shooting this video very briefly and hoping that a few people are going to jump on. We are running quite late, some technical issues. So today we're talking about landlords' purchases are at a record time low. And what I want to do today is just look at the difference between sort of London landlords leaving London, the capital, to move on to buy properties elsewhere, and whether there's any truth on that. We'll also be talking about the rental market, where it's at right now as we get to the beyond half of 2024, and also the housing market in general. So we're going to dive deep into some figures, especially leaning towards what will impact and affect and is affecting landlords right now. And that's going to be clear to see, especially with the articles that we're going to review and the stats and the figures from Rightmove and Landmark. Okay, so I just want to wait for anyone wanted to jump on, give them a bit of time. As I said, we are running a few minutes behind schedule, but I hope this will be worthwhile for a lot of landlords out there, but also buy-to-let investors. It also be very helpful for anyone just buying a home for their own purposes, because we will be looking at Rightmove as well. So far from our last live video that we had, we were talking about the King's Speech and, of course, Labour's plan to revolutionize the property market, including building 1.5 million homes and, of course, relabeling of what the Conservative had, which was the renters bill, reform bill. So let's jump straight into some of the articles that I've chosen for today. So this one was an interesting one that I wanted to look at. Investors shun buy-to-let as purchases fall to an all-time low. So if we look at this, it says buy-to-let is no longer investment of choice for many investors, new figures suggest. And it's interesting when it talks about no longer the choice for investors. Now, for those of you who obviously have been investing in property for a long time, and other areas, whether that will be shares or, dare I say it, crypto, whatever that may be. When it comes to residential property, at least, there are sort of three buckets as to why people decide to buy property. So number one, of course, is the capital growth that you get with that. Number two, it is that the tenant pays your mortgage effectively. Now, what you want with that effectively as well, which comes back to the third bucket, is that you want to have some cash flow. Now, that's somewhat more challenging in today's market to have some cash flow. And of course, it also depends on how much money you're putting down as a deposit. For sure, you're going to need 25%. Now, if you put in more, you're going to have some cash flow there. Now, it depends, of course, if you're investing in London, the capital, you will naturally get less yield than what you would get in other areas. But then with that yield does come risk. So just wanted to point that out. And of course, because we get a mixture of people on these videos, some are very seasoned landlords, others are people who want to enter the market and want to find out the difference as to investing in property and investing elsewhere. So those are the kinds of three golden buckets that you won't get anywhere else. And of course, a level of control. You buy crypto, you buy shares, you don't have any control over that. With regards to property, despite all the regulations, there is a level of control there. So those are kind of differences. There was one more I wanted to share with you, but it's completely skipped my mind. Okay, so going back to the article, landlords purchased 1 in 10 homes sold across Great Britain during the first half of this year. This is the lowest share since our records began in 2010, and considerably less than 16% record in 2015. So you and of course, these the 2015 figure, 2010 figure of 16%, 2015, apologies, 16. So you got double digits there and just barely hitting the double digit so far this year. So more recently, high mortgage rates combined with political uncertainty and threat of new rental regulations by Labour, of course, because the threat of regulation has been there for several years, as you may already know, weighed on the appetite for new investors to enter the market. Now, we've spoken about this before, and for those of you who do follow my channel or don't, if you missed a video which goes so much into detail with regards to the effect and the impact that not only the regulation has had, but recent events such as the mortgage rates. Now, if you don't know what they are, and there's many reasons, by the way, but this is a more direct impact that's had with regards to regulation. And I'm not going to bore you with these because I have shared these before in depth, but just an overview of these include, but not exclusively, the changes to regulation in terms of Section 24 not being able to offset your mortgage interest. Of course, that happened back in 2015, 2016. And then following that, the stamp duty, a surcharge of 3%, of course, has had an impact and definitely a barrier to entry to the market, which isn't so much a bad thing. I'm sure landlords want less competition. And the wear and tear tax allowance was also changed. But you also have the element of the 2019 tenant fee ban. Also had an impact in terms of profitability for landlords and agents for that matter. But you also have, of course, the recent mortgage rates that have hit a lot of landlords. And if they haven't hit so far, they will hit at some point. In fact, I was speaking to one landlady just yesterday who is offsetting her properties. I say offset, she's restructuring. She definitely doesn't want to leave the market, but she has taken on a lot of debt. Of course, we had many years of cheap money, and therefore her strategy was based on that cheap money. Now, because that's no longer available, she now needs to restructure. But in no way is she exiting the market, and in no way is she exiting the market from here in London, in the capital, to leave to another city or another region in the UK. And I think that's the emphasis and the point I wanted to touch on here today, because I've seen sort of different articles and even videos talking about London are leaving the capital in drones to invest elsewhere to follow yields. And in the circle that I'm in and the landlords that I speak to on a day-to-day basis and a weekly, and believe me, they are a lot of landlords. They are not, the landlord that invest in London typically will know that they're not investing for yield. They're investing for capital growth. And London always delivers when it comes to capital growth. And they are not going to compromise that. The level of security, the level of certainty over a short-term gain like yields. And of course, it can't be negative, because if it's negative, then that may persuade a lot of landlords, to look elsewhere or perhaps even just exit the market. But you do invest in London, and London always delivers. Now, of course, it has a slow market, but London, what it does, and it does this beautifully, by the way, never fails. It has a cycle. London sometimes does nothing at all for a period of 10, 12, 15 years, and then suddenly just shoots up. And we'll be looking at some of those figures in a little bit. So going back to the Property Eye article. So more recently, high mortgage rates combined with political uncertainty have threatened rental regulation, have weighed the appetite of landlords. So let's look at this graph. Landlord purchases outpace sales, rental supply increasing. So you got the red line on purchases, and then you got the sales in here. So assuming current trends continue into the second half of the year, in number terms, there are likely to be 113,000 new buy-to-let purchases across Great Britain in 2024, 75,000 or 40% fewer than in 2015. And that's why the headline that we had on the thumbnail which is 40% lower in comparison to 2015 if the trends continue this way. And the question is the trend going to continue this way or not? Is the reason the recent statements and the recent King's speech going to encourage more landlords to buy more properties now that there is some sense of certainty as to what's going to happen? Because there are two things here. It could go either way. One way is, well, actually, no, more landlords are going to sell up because Labour are seen as a more friendly government to tenants. And that increases the risk for landlords and therefore wear out. Or the other way could be, wow, okay, we have a new government in place. They are certain as to what they want and they're going to implement it, which is different to the Conservative, whereby they drag these renters reform bill for over 4 years. I think it was first announced in 2019 and only just really rushed it as the election was called out. I mean, literally rushed it through. And actually, sorry, didn't rush it through. They failed to rush it through. I correct myself. They failed to rush to even put through the renters reform before doing the election. What they did rush through was the lease and freehold reform bill. So what a lot of landlords are sharing with me is that at least right now we have a little bit more certainty, and therefore we can now plan. And if we have to sell a few properties, if we want to sell the full amount of our properties, then fair enough. But we know what we're getting moving forward, which is fair enough. And in fact, a lot of organizations that are supporting landlords, they are really, really asking Labour to prioritize the housing and implement, their new labeled, I think it's renters' right bill, of some sort. They definitely rebranded them. So let's look at this other. Actually, let's wrap up with the property eye because there was a few interesting points there still to cover. I'm getting ahead of myself. So for all of you who have jumped in, really appreciate you joining us. And actually, let's have a look at a few of the comments that are here to review. So before we carry on with the article. Hi, Leslie. Thanks for jumping in. I know you are a loyal listener tuning in. So we got Martin. Glad to catch you live again. Well, glad to have you on, Martin. Really appreciate it. Andrew, Danny, are landlords seeing increased demand for long-term rental as a result? The demand is definitely there, Andrew. I'd love to pull up. Actually, I'm going to pull up some figures in a second. But to answer your question, what we're seeing day to day, yes, the demand is there. What has shifted is the demand is certainly not the same as it was a year ago. But that's a good thing, Andrew, because where we were in terms of demand a year ago is simply not sustainable. It's not sustainable for tenants, renters, and it's certainly not also sustainable for let me show this. It's certainly not sustainable for landlords. Now, there is a limit, of course, of how much tenants can pay. And even in London, where we have super prime properties and we have international professionals, corporates, students who have parents who have deep pockets, they also have a limit. So what we've seen over the course of the last few months is definitely properties remaining on the market a little longer than what they were before. Now, to put this into perspective and give context, they can be on the market maybe 5 to 7 days, some probably even 2 weeks, in comparison to like 7 or 24 hours just even 6 months ago, and whereby most agents had to just switch off the listing because the hundreds of calls would just come in, and then you have probably around about 20 viewings and multiple offers, tens of offers. So that isn't the market we're in right now. We'll certainly have multiple offers, but not at the level it was before. And again, that can only be a good thing. I'll be honest. We're now in summer. And I've seen some properties that have lagged on the market probably a week or two. And I thought there was going to be so much more demand in comparison to 3 months ago. Because if you're not familiar with at least the London market, this is peak season as we enter to September. So a lot of people, because they're being relocated from within the same firm they have, or whether they're changing jobs, but certainly even the university students as they graduate, they will do this around about July time, even sooner. And so they're ready to start their job or even start their next study in September. So I hope that's helpful, Andrew. There certainly is demand. I wouldn't be concerned, especially if you have a property in a major city. You're going to have no challenges there. So, Danny, how is the slowdown in holiday home purchasing affecting the broader rental market? Well, I wouldn't say there's a huge slowdown. I mean, there was an article which, you know what, I could not find it. I'll ask my assistant to try and find that article, which is short-term holiday homes prices slowing down. So, I mean, to give you some context in this, a property in wouldn't be central Marylebone, but it will be around Marylebone, will cost per day. Actually, let's do this backwards. Will cost in terms of rental price, it's costing around about 2,800, two bed, 2,800 times 12. It's costing around about 33 grand for the year. Now, if a landlord were to put that on the market, remove that from the long-term market and rent that out per day, if we take £175 per day, 365, we're looking at 63 grand. So that's double the amount. And to be honest with you, it should be more triple. I've made these figures very loosely, but that should be even sort of around about 2.5 times more in comparison to the long-term let. So you can see why the short-term market is so attractive to many landlords. And so if the short-term holiday service rental were to dip, which it has by the looks of it, a little bit, is that going to motivate landlords to come back onto the long let? That's not something that I'm seeing. I think there's going to have to be um, a way more kind of things to happen, and I think that's going to happen with regards to regulation. I saw an article with regards to some regulations happening in Scotland, which is absolutely crazy. And actually, let me try and bring this up now. Whether this catches on, and the reality is that these things do tend to catch on. So whenever one government does something or one council does something and it works, what they do is everyone follows a suit. Um, I think that I shared something the other day with regards to HMO, and it was that HMO in Camden, which is a borough here in London, uh, recently I've seen that the price is like £1,200 to renew the license. And I thought that was crazy because I remember when that was more along the lines of around about £500 first came out. So again, when the council or the government sees there is a room to make money in some way, then they they will squeeze it as much as they can. I could talk about this forever. I mean, let's look at the congestion charge and how that started. So yeah. So here's the article I wanted to share with you, Andrew. So, short let controversial council consults on Airbnb restrictions. So, controversial council has launched a 12-week consultation on its policy restriction Airbnb style short lets. Edinburgh Council insists that new Airbnb and other short let landlords register for license before being allowed to take bookings and display EPC and health and safety information on listings. Now, a year after the final changes were introduced, the council is consulting on the policies, which have been criticised by landlords and tourism groups in Scotland. So Scotland is definitely not very popular. If you are familiar with Scotland and the recent rent caps that they've had and how that has been a complete disaster, then I'm not sure whether they're doing something right. And who is in power up there in terms of councils? It's just something to keep an eye on in terms of whether London is going to follow suit. So let's have a look at this. I wanted to see this. So average gross yield achieved on new buy to let properties. So as I said, landlords are attracted to high yield properties, and you will get some landlords like that, which is fine. But the reality is, looking at capital growth, that is where you're going to win on in property all the time. So looking at this, we've got London has the lowest yield region. So you can see that grey line going at the bottom. And then you've got the Northeast having the highest yields in the region. And then England and Wales sort of in the middle. And again, you can see why people are attracted to the Northeast and sort of the Midlands and that type of area. So if we look at here, average rents, inner London, £3,000. But then if you go down and you look at the Midlands, it's £975 per calendar month. But look at the yield. So the average yield, actually, what I see a day-to-day basis is around about 7%. Now, you got London being 2.7%. I think that's harsh. I think that's really harsh. I don't know what type of, and even sort of, okay, that's year to year. 2%. That's a change in yield. Okay, that makes more sense. So one thing I wanted to talk about, as we're talking about the Midlands, I wanted to share as to why landlords are attracted to the Midlands and the North. So talking about the initiatives and the projects that have happened with the North, including the HS2 and other bigger projects, it's been something that has been attracting a lot of landlords. And of course, there's been a lot of development. There's been a lot of professionals, a lot of students, international students. I mean, Leeds, if we use that as an example, I mean, in the financial industry, it's very, very strong. And if we look at Manchester as well, I mean, there are cities out there that are doing very well. But to compare them to London, the capital, which is a global financial hub, it's rather different. And from a risk point of view, again, as I shared at the very beginning, I don't know many people who own property in the capital who are going to be selling up. They diversify. Absolutely. I've definitely seen more of that, of landlords diversifying and purchasing properties in the north, but certainly not selling up what they have here. And of course, that's also going to depend on the type of properties that you're buying, but also the capital that people have to invest. If you have someone who is has, of course, not much in the pot and has, for example, 50 grand, that's not going to get you anywhere in London. So therefore, I'm seeing a lot of people who are on the lower end investing up in the north. But let me give you an example. I shared this example actually somewhere else. So because a lot of people said, Danny, but if we buy a property in the north, it's going to be, if I have, let's say, I'm going to use £500,000 as an example. You have £500,000 to invest, and you're investing in London. So I'm going to show you two examples. Let's start with this property. So this is a 2-bedroom property in London, £500,000, has a rental income of approximately around about £35,000, which is around about 2,850 per month. So you have this property, brings in over £30,000. When you take into consideration the amount of the purchase, it's going to leave you around about 6%, and that is even taking into consideration a £5,000 on average service charge, which is, for a lot of you who are up north, it may be huge. Here in London, depending on what it provides, gym, concierge, terrace, possibly even a swimming pool, not this particular one. That is the average you're going to get. In fact, £5,000 to £6,000 is probably cheap. So that's going to leave you around about 6%. Now, if we then look at another property, if you were to invest that same £500,000 with the intention of saving on stamp duty, right? And you're going to purchase, bear with me one sec. Okay, I am struggling on finding this other property, but it's a property in Derby. Now, this property in Derby is a one bed flat, and the purchase price is £160,000. Here you are, found it here. So this property is £160,000. So if we're working on the idea that you're going to save money on stamp duty, but you have £500,000 to buy properties, right? You're going to buy this property for £160,000. This property will give you also around about a 6% yield. It's £800 on rental per calendar month. And when you look at the numbers, I'm not even going to take away the service charge. Service charge is minimum in comparison to the £5,000 that I just shared with London. But I'm not even going to take that into account, and that's going to give you around about a 6% yield. Now, will you save money on stamp duty? Well, £160,000, you're paying on average around about 4.5 grand to 5 grand on stamp duty times three. That's 15 grand. Now you compare that to the 27, 25 odd grand that you're paying on just buying one property in London for £500,000. Absolutely, you're saving yourself like 10 or 12 grand. But you've only paid one legal fee for that property in London. You've only paid one agent admin fee for that property in London, and also one mortgage broker. So just with that, if you take that into consideration, buying three of these units, that's already taking you up around about 20 odd grand. So the difference isn't huge. I just wanted to make that point, and apologies if I sort of digress from the article, but it's just a point I like to make, that there is an illusion that there's a huge saving there. And yes, it is. If you're just buying £160,000 property, which isn't a saving because you wouldn't buy that, you'd probably buy a garage with that in London. So if you were to spend £500,000 or invest £500,000, then you're not really making much of a saving there. So let's jump on. I promised you guys I would talk a little bit about the market as well. So let's jump on to some stats. So you got the rental market here. This is Q2 for 2024 as per Rightmove. So the average advertised rent outside of London has now hit a quarterly record of £1,300. And I've seen this on the news actually from the beginning of the week. So £1,300 now, which is crazy. And if you look at in London, it's over £2,500. So this is slowing since the peak of 16% in 2020. So the number of inquiries each property is receiving from would-be tenants is now 17, which, whilst down from 26 in 2023, is more than double the A at the time in 2019. And I think actually 17 in 26 in 2023, I'd say probably double that of what we were seeing in London. Easily double that. Despite the overall rental supply slowly improving from last year, plus 14%, the number of rental properties available is still 20% below pre-pandemic levels. And I think that's something that's just going to continue as we go along further on in the year. Now, I would think, and I don't have any stats to prove this, but I would think that to an extent, the rental market isn't as bad as it could be post-pandemic. due to the fact that people can have that remote working and can move around. Now, if they weren't open minded, both from an employer's point of view, but also as an employee, in the fact that, I've been working for you for so many years, and yet I want to continue working for you, but I can't stay in London because the rent is just so freaking high. And that's understandable. But I'd like to move away 3, 4 hours from here. Surely that's helped to kind of somewhat absorb the rental the rental crisis even more. I don't know if there's any truth in that. I'm just putting sort of two and two together. Leave me a comment below. Let me know if there's any kind of logic behind that. So going back to the rental index. So what we do have here is asking rent per month, which I already shared. And let's go here to the overview. So the average advertised rent on new properties onto the market quarterly, as I said, was £1,300. Average rent prices are 7% higher than a year ago. Average advertised rent in London have also risen to a new record of 2,600. The overall balance between supply and demand continued to improve during the second quarter of this year. And we can obviously see that based on the number of inquiries compared now to 2023. Now, the number of inquiries each rental property is receiving, as I said, 17. The slowing in number of inquiries property. So this is kind of an overview of the same of what we just seen. So national quarterly change in average asking rents. There it is for you to say. So regional trends. This is always an interesting graph to see. So East Midlands, West Midlands, 1,150, East Midlands, North 1,146, average yield 7% to the Northwest, and an average yield is around about 6%. And then you have East of England, and let's look at London. So London average yield is 5.5%. And it's the point I want to make when it comes to this yield is it was very rare to see this type of yield sort of pre-pandemic. You weren't seeing that type of yield. It just wasn't there. So to see that type of yield now, and for people to say, well, London is not a good place to invest, I guess that may be so, depending on how much borrowing you're having to take on, because obviously that has a huge influence on how much you can actually take away in your pocket. But London is a very it's a very interesting market whereby there is a lot of money, and whilst there is a lot of mortgage, a lot of lending here, likewise there are markets and regions within certain boroughs and neighborhoods that really don't have any borrowing at all. So I hope that you're finding this helpful so far. Let's look at what other questions we have from people. So we have something here from Wise. What is your outlook on the evolution of the rental market over the next 5 to 10 years? Let me take out my crystal ball, Mr. Wise. So it's definitely going to be on a rental side, at least, from what the articles I've read and seen from Savills and other sort of agencies that that dominate the country, especially in prime London, is that it is going to be consistent. It's going to increase. It's just not going to increase at the pace that we've seen so far. In terms of supply, there's going to be continued supply issue, and it really depends on whether Labour is going to be able to deliver on the 1.5 million properties that they hope to build, and the planning permission easing and everything else. Now, all that being said and promised, and that being delivered, there will be a difference across the country, and especially around London, I reckon, if that's going to be delivered. But that won't be in a couple of years or 3 years' time. This will take time. It will need collaboration with private developers from different government agencies, councils, infrastructure, even. So that's going to take time. So it will be interesting to see, but also a lot of these houses are going to be social housing. So the devil is in the detail in terms of 1.5 million properties becoming available. But then, how many of these properties are really private rented for the private rental sector? And how many of these are actually social housing, which I'm not saying it's something bad. I'm just saying what type of properties are going to be built and who are they for? Because yeah, there are different stakeholders in this market, of course. So, quick question: what are the most common concerns you've been hearing from fellow landlords regarding the new changes? I'll tell you what I have seen, and this isn't specific to the new changes, Martin. This is more towards a trend that I've seen a little bit more. So before, at least in the circle of landlords, the immediate circle of landlords that I speak to on a daily and weekly basis, it would be very rare that I see any challenges with regards to agents not wanting to pay or honor their contract, um, or anything like that. Um, because the situation changed. The situation they changed. The tenants will honor their contract anyway. What I'm seeing increasingly is tenants subletting, and of course there is a contract for that, and they will feel the full force of the law, especially if you have a good lawyer. So subletting to either subsidize their rental whilst they're on holiday, or they've taken quite a long-term leave, or perhaps they're even in the property and they want to subsidize their rental. I've seen a lot of change in terms of jobs, whether that be relocation or whether that be companies kind of downsizing. So that type of thing with tenants is something that I'm seeing more and more, which in the circles that I frequently speak with, it is kind of unusual. So I believe that referencing, and of course, referencing can only do so much, but certainly referencing to a very high level. And there are some great softwares and some great suppliers and contractors that you can reach out to do that, is more important now than ever. And experience, because you can look at paper and you can see something black and white, but it's only with experience that you can actually suss out something that's not quite right and raise a red flag. I really do feel for landlords that get themselves into trouble with a tenant, whereby there were so many red flags that they could have seen along the way, but because of the lack of experience, they just simply didn't catch on. So that, and then if you want to add to that, having issues with tenants right now and what that can mean further on with labour's regulation, and whether that's going to make it even more challenging, possibly, Martin. I hope that's helpful. So referencing and experience is something that's needed now more than ever in the current market. So what strategy can we employ to mitigate the impact of declining buy-to-let purchases? Well, there isn't any strategy. I mean, if you're in the market, Leslie, I would assume that's a good thing for you, because that means less competition. Less competition means less void periods, or no void periods at all. You get more tenants to choose from, because less properties means more demand for your property. So you get a pool of tenants that you can choose from, which will minimize risk. And then also a better rental. My recommendation on that, though, this has a kind of a double edge sword type of thing, which is I wouldn't necessarily go for the highest rental. I've seen situations whereby landlords market the property at such a high price, to a point whereby they probably just get maybe one viewing in a course of a couple of weeks. And then that one tenant wants to put an offer and put the an offer on the property without question. And then when you look at kind of the referencing that they can provide, it rings so many alarm bells. But because the landlord is, so fixed on a rental price, they say, well, this is the one. And despite these red flags, I want to go through, which is a freaking huge a mistake. I would rather a landlord have sort of, 15 people through the door, maybe five offers, and the landlord gets to choose, out of the five, which one's better. I've seen that happen a number of times. So let's look at actually let's jump into a bit of the housing market, which I promise to an extent will happen. So we've moved away from rentals. It's now 7:40. For those of you who've joined, thank you so much. I'm just going to just go a bit of an overview on the housing market. So what we've seen is listing volumes were up by 6% according to Landmark Property Report. Q2 2024 beats 2019. So that's 6% up. Now, if we look at sales subject to contract volumes in Q2 2024 continued at Q1 levels, is 32% lower when compared to 2019. Now, the reason they're comparing it to 2019 is, it's pre-pandemic kind of market and stats, and it gives us kind of context of a more normal market for whatever that means after so many, events that have happened since then. Now, search order volume. So Q2 24, so dip down a further 3% from Q1 2024, lower than 2019. Now, this is the big one. Hopefully, you can see my screen. Completion levels in Q2 2024 remain the same as Q1 2024 at 40% down these Q2 2019. So those are big numbers. I mean, almost half, almost 50%. Those are huge, huge numbers. Now, if we look at this, listings compared to subject to sold, compared to searches and completions. So, of course, you can see the completion in the blue line just lagging, and especially lagging when it comes to June. So listings are up, sold subject to contract down, purple down, and then the blue especially down. Now, of course, the completion is something that needs to be taken into consideration, that this is taken from the land registry, I'm going to assume, and therefore there is always going to be a lag time. So yeah, just something to keep in mind. So for those of you who have joined, thank you again. I'm going to look at here quickly to see if there is anything else that you want me to share with you. I guess the mortgage market would probably be one of the big news happening, especially from today within the next 24 hours. For those of you who've been waiting for some change and the Bank of England to reduce, of course, that number, which we'll find out in probably like a couple of weeks, if I'm not mistaken. And we have a great live, by the way, for those of you who are online. We have a great live happening on the first week of August. We promise. We've been listening, and we've been asked that we want guests and professionals on the live. So we'll be joined by a mortgage expert, I think just a couple of days after the Bank of England have their next meeting. But in the meantime, I know that even with that not happening, Best Buy home purchase mortgage deals fall below 4%. Best Buy mortgage rates have fallen below 4% for the first time since the start of the year. Nationwide is the first lender to release home loan below 4% benchmark following recent weeks of downward repricing. So listen, what's happening is that there is a lot of competition between lenders out there, which is a good thing for home buyers and for landlords out there, because of course that means more competition, means that they're beaten down on price, and that's what we're seeing at the moment. So for home buyers out there, maybe not from buy to let to an extent, but for those of you who are waiting for massive changes to happen within the mortgage rates, it's not going to happen. I mean, there might be some slight changes, but if you're someone, for example, looking to buy a property because you want a bigger garden and it's for your family, and you're waiting to see what's going to happen with the Bank of England in the next few weeks, and then you're going to wait again towards the end of the year, that difference isn't going to be huge. So, I think you're better off sort of working with what is there now, because at least you have certainty. Because there is an expectation for sure that those interest rates are going to reduce, but it's not certain. So we know now at least we know what's happening now, which is that it is lower than what it was at the beginning of the year. So I'll be jumping on that. Buy to let investors, of course, have more challenges than just a straight residential. But again, there are rates out there that are certainly more attractive than what they were 6 months ago. So I would work with that. There's also something I want to share with you for you buy to let investors, which is something I heard, which I found was actually quite interesting, which was that previously people wanted to secure a, a 2-year mortgage, so that to see this downward trend in the next 12 to 24 months, and to keep an eye on that. So therefore, they were only securing a 2-year mortgage at a higher rate, because of course, if you know and you've been shopping around, you know that the mortgage is going to be a higher interest if it's a 2-year as opposed to a 5-year. But something that a landlord shared with me actually made a lot of sense. He was securing 5 years because those fees, those lender fees, are so high, and then they also paying a mortgage broker in 2 years' time to pay those fees again, and to pay the mortgage broker again, actually works out to be more expensive than perhaps potentially securing themselves for that 5-year rate, which I found very interesting. If you're not working with a broker, you should be. And I'll always ask them to be very transparent, and perhaps even compare them with other brokers out there. As I said, we're going to have a mortgage specialist on live in a couple of weeks, shortly after that Bank of England meeting. And I would recommend that you subscribe to the channel so you're prompted and updated with these experts that are going to be jumping on. I'm excited, and I know quite a few people who join us are as well. Thank you very much. Listen, I appreciate you jumping on. So I'm going to answer these last questions here. Looking ahead to the webinar. Well, thank you very much, Andrew. And let's see if there was anything else here in terms of us sharing with you. No, that was around it. So listen, thank you very much, guys, for joining. Do subscribe for our next guest that's going to be joining us, mortgage experts, and we'll also have some legal experts joining us as well. Thank you, and have a good evening.